Hello there, I'm a nerd named Ryan, and last night we got the return of my favourite show of all time, Doctor Who, which came back with a 2 episode premiere for Season 1 or Series 14. And I figured I'd just come on here and give just a few thoughts on the 2 episodes that we got last night. I'll go into what I like and dislike about each episode specifically in a moment, but first I do just want to kind of touch on two things that I liked, kind of that were consistent throughout the 2 episodes that I really liked. The first one being Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson as the 15th Doctor and Ruby Sunday. I thought those two were fantastic. I think they are a really fun TARDIS team. Their dynamic is great. I think Ncuti's energy is fantastic. He has this kind of just sort of wonderfully contagious excitement as the Doctor, which I think is really a really great trait for a Doctor to have. Matt Smith had that kind of energy as well. So did Jodie to some extent. A couple of classic era Doctors as well, like Tom Baker in his early years and Sylvester McCoy. I like when you have that kind of energy and that kind of that kind of joy that just radiates off you as the Doctor. So I like Ncuti a lot. And Millie Gibson as Ruby Sunday, she absolutely matches that energy. She was really fun. I like the two of them together. Russell T Davies did a good job writing them together. And I think the two actors just played off each other really, really well. So I'm excited to see what they do in the coming weeks with the rest of this series. The other thing that I really liked that was consistent throughout both episodes is I like the setup of Ruby's backstory. I think that's really interesting. You know, they've got the series arc, and it's all based around Ruby and where she came from, who her biological mum is, and all that sort of stuff. It feels very reminiscent of Series 7 with Clara being, the impossible girl. I got those kind of vibes off that. So really interested to see where they go with that. There were some interesting kind of callbacks to the Christmas special, particularly in episode 1, and a few kind of hints here and there dropped through both episodes, not only to the stuff with Ruby's past, but also kind of to the big bad and various other kind of elements. There are a lot of things set up here that I think are gonna pay off in a really interesting way. I'm kind of intrigued to see where they go with them. So yeah, those were kind of things that were consistent throughout both episodes that I really, really liked. Well, let's get into the specifics of each episode. We start with Space Babies. Okay, so first off, we'll talk about what I liked about Space Babies. I really liked the opening. I really liked the start. Basically, this series has been rebranded as Season 1, and a lot of the marketing around it has really made it feel like, it's a reboot, it's a jumping on point, it's a you can start here and then catch up later if you are interested in it, if you like this. And I think the first kind of few minutes do a really good job of explaining Doctor Who to someone who's never seen Doctor Who. So Ruby enters the TARDIS, and the Doctor basically gives her sort of a crash course in his own history. He says, I'm the Doctor, I'm a Time Lord, I'm from Gallifrey. My people don't really use names, they use titles. That's why I'm called the Doctor. I've been called the Doctor for so long that it basically is just my name now. He talks about the TARDIS being a space and time ship. Later on, he mentions that he has 2 hearts. So he drops all this information about, his backstory and the show and, kind of what Doctor Who is, basically. And of course, he's saying it to Ruby, but he's really saying it to the audience. Again, for if you're new to Doctor Who, he's kind of explaining it all to you. And it is an exposition dump, and usually I'm not a big fan of those, but I think Russell T Davies makes the dialogue nice and snappy, so it doesn't really feel like an exposition dump. And again, Ncuti Gatwa just has such a kind of an enthusiasm for it and such a contagious kind of energy that you kind of don't get bored listening to him just explain everything. Even someone like me who knows Doctor Who knows the backstory of the Doctor, who knows all this stuff, it's fun watching the Doctor explain it because of Ncuti Gatwa's performance. So that was really interesting. I liked that. There was a really nice scene where they first arrive on the spaceship where the Space Babies are. And the Doctor opens a panel and Ruby sees outer space for the first time. And, they're talking about the Doctor's past, and she says, how do you keep going? All your family's dead. How do you keep going? And he says, for days like this, Ruby Sunday. And he points out the window. And that scene is great. That scene goes on a little bit too long, but it's that moment where he goes, I carry on for days like this, for stuff like this. that is, I think, a perfect kind of summation of the Doctor. I love that kind of, and again, the energy with which Ncuti Gatwa delivers that line really helps as well. I liked that bit. That was a nice moment. There was also a scene towards the end where the Doctor kind of welcomes Ruby onto the TARDIS properly and says, "Look, we can go anywhere in space and time, but we can't go and find out who your birth mother is. That's the one place we can't go. We'll create a paradox," and basically just explains to her why they can't go there. And that's a really powerful scene. I think Millie Gibson and Ncuti Gatwa are really good in that scene. They're the episode is very, very fast paced, but I think it's these moments where they sort of slow everything down and they have these kind of thoughtful moments and these thoughtful discussions where the performances of Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson can really shine through, and where the writing really shines through. So I really liked that scene as well. So there was some good stuff in Space Babies. Unfortunately, it did disappoint me a little bit, and I hate to say that because I love Doctor Who and I was so excited to watch this new series. I went into this full of enthusiasm for it, and yeah, the episode, it kind of disappointed me a little bit. It wasn't a terrible episode by any means. It had some fun moments. It was very, very fast paced. I was never kind of bored watching it because it just kept moving all the time. Save for, like I say, a couple of scenes where it slowed down, but mostly it was just going and going and going. So I liked the pacing of it. But the actual story itself and the kind of tone was a little bit too goofy for me, a little bit too silly. Maybe silly is not the right word, because I don't mind when Doctor Who goes a bit silly, but it felt quite childish and not necessarily in a good way. First off, there's the space babies themselves, right? They use real babies, obviously, but they have like mouths like superimposed over them so that they can talk. That was very distracting. That was a very distracting effect. It was weird to see that. It kept taking me out of the story. I'm like, what is happening with the mouths? What is going on there? So I wasn't a big fan of that. The bogeyman that lives in the lower decks of the ship, of the space station. I liked the design of that. That was cool, and I liked the explanation for why it kind of exists and how it's all kind of based around children's stories and how children's stories need a monster. That's really interesting. The actual twist was a bit silly, and I think it makes the monster less effective, personally. So I wasn't a big fan of the twist either, or the kind of the resolution. There's also a bit right at the end, and I genuinely I couldn't believe they did this. I thought this was a bit too silly for me, where basically the space station has to move. They have to move it to this planet for plot reasons. And the way that they move it is by releasing all of the methane gas that has built up from the baby's diaper changes. So basically, they release a load of baby shit, and the ship farts its way to the planet. Like, literally, there is a big gas cloud that just pops out the back of the ship. I'm surprised they didn't do a fart noise, because that's how kind of silly this episode was. It wouldn't have surprised me if they'd done a fart noise. So yeah, that was really the thing. Like, I understand the purpose of it being kind of silly, being kind of light, and welcoming new fans in with this kind of goofy, wacky story. For me personally, I didn't really vibe with the style and the tone it was going for. I realized that some people will absolutely have loved that, and that's great. For me, I wasn't the biggest fan of the tone and the style of it. But no, again, there were fun moments to it. Wasn't really for me. It was a little bit too silly for me. Basically, I know Doctor Who is a family show, and it's always been a family show, and it always will be a family show. This is the first time in a while that I felt like this was an episode purely for kids, and like little kids as well. Because like even something like the Sarah Jane Adventures, which was an actual kid show, that very rarely got as silly as this. Yeah, it was very silly. It was a bit too silly for me, but that's just my personal taste. Most of it didn't annoy me though. Most of it was just fine. It was just kind of, I just let it wash over me. There was one aspect though that really annoyed me, and I have to talk about it because it annoyed me completely. And that was every time they kind of mention the space babies, every time they reference them or acknowledge them or talk to them, or even just remember that they exist, the Doctor goes, babies, space babies! Every time he says this, right? Like, if you say it once or twice, that's fine, that's, oh, it's the name of the episode, that's quite fun. But, like, it's every time. Like, if you did a drinking game, if you decided to take a shot every time you heard the phrase space babies said in this episode, you'd get very drunk in the 45 minutes that this was on, because it started to get a little bit annoying for me personally, as it went on. But yeah, Space Baby's not a terrible episode by any means, but I don't know, for me it was just a bit too silly. I couldn't really vibe with the tone of it personally. And if it had just been that episode, I probably would have been a little bit disappointed in, my viewing experience. But fortunately, we then got The Devil's Chord, which I thought was a much, much better episode. So yeah, then we got The Devil's Chord, which I thought was a massive improvement. I really, really liked this episode. A few things of note. First off, I really liked Maestro. I thought Maestro was a really interesting villain. I thought the premise and the setup of the story was great, and how Maestro is kind of this demigod that feasts on music. And that was a really kind of interesting idea, to kind of have Maestro be responsible for music just disappearing, like music just doesn't exist, and kind of the consequences of something like music, and being able to express yourself through music not existing. That was really, really interesting, and there were some really dark moments in the episode where the Doctor kind of shows Ruby, look, this is what 2024 looks like in a world where music hasn't existed since, like the 20s, or like proper music hasn't existed since the 20s. That was a really interesting and really it was a really interesting idea, and they did it really well. Again, Maestro was really, really cool as a villain. I actually like that they acknowledge that Maestro is a child of the Toymaker, because I think they're very kind of similar characters, not just in their power, like they have very similar kind of powers and stuff like that, but also I think Jinx Monsoon, who plays Maestro, gives a performance that's very kind of similar to the performance that Neil Patrick Harris gave in The Giggle, where it's sort of wacky and very over the top. Maestro feels like a Disney villain a lot of the time, which I think is quite funny, because obviously in America and other places this will air on Disney Plus. So I like that they kind of went for the Disney villain vibes for Maestro. But yeah, much like the Toymaker, they have that kind of wacky, over the top stuff, and the kind of self awareness, and almost breaking the fourth wall. I mean, Maestro does break the fourth wall a couple of times, but there's also that. But they also are able to kind of turn it at any moment to be like, no, this is a dangerous and scary villain. And you should not be taking them lightly. So I like the parallels between Maestro and the Toymaker, and that was a really interesting twist for me. Like I say, I think Jinx Monsoon was really well cast. I think she was great as Maestro. I think Maestro himself was a fantastic villain. I liked the inclusion of the Beatles. Like, I always knew the Beatles were kind of going to be just like window dressing in this episode, and they kind of are. The one thing I will say about the Beatles, George Harrison is my favourite of the Beatles. He gets basically no dialogue. Like, him and Ringo are barely in this. It's basically John and Paul that get all the dialogue. They each get a scene with Paul talking to the Doctor and John talking to Ruby, and then they come back at the end. So yeah, like, I don't know, it's not really the Beatles. It's John and Paul. That kind of, it didn't annoy me. I'm like, oh man. It didn't annoy me, but I was like, oh man, George doesn't get any dialogue, man. He's my favourite of the Beatles. But yeah, the Beatles are basically just, there a little bit. They're effectively only in the episode because it's set in the 1960s and it's about music. So, of course, they're going to feature the Beatles in there. Another thing I liked, because it's set in the 1960s, I like that specifically in 1963, I like that they reference the very start of Doctor Who back in the 1960s. They actually mentioned Susan, which was really awesome. I love when modern Who acknowledges classic Who. So that was really cool. I liked that moment. Him explaining, and again, it's more kind of for new viewers, like him explaining to Ruby, yeah, that's, I'm over there with my granddaughter at this point. With your what? Yeah, my granddaughter, and all this. They're explaining all that. That was really cool. I like how this one's directed. Kind of, I like when you see Maestro's powers at work. It's all very well staged and very well done. I like that a lot. I like also that Maestro can travel through pianos. That's just a cool, I don't know why, I liked that. That was just a cool power. I thought that was quite fun. Maestro can just travel through random pianos. Yeah, that was entertaining. So yeah, this episode I think was much better. I liked it a lot more. It felt much more like what I'm used to from Doctor Who. The one kind of thing I'm not so sure about with this episode is that it literally finishes with a musical number. Like there's a big all singing, all dancing musical number at the end. I actually thought this was going to be a musical episode. It isn't. I mean, given that the story is about, a world in which music doesn't exist, it'd be kind of weird to do that with a musical episode. But we do get a big sort of show tune at the end. And it was fine. I didn't mind it, but I'm like, why is this here? Really? It kind of felt like filler. Like this episode was actually 5 minutes longer than Space Babies, and I feel like a lot of that extra 5 minutes was this musical number, which again, not a terrible musical number. It was fine. I don't really know what the point of it was being there, other than just to be a bit of fun at the end. The song is very good. It's very catchy though, and I did like actually in the musical number you see Murray Gold at the piano, playing the piano. That was really good. I liked that. Like the musical number I have mixed feelings on, but I liked the little Easter egg with Murray Gold. I'm like, oh, Murray Gold's there. that was good. I enjoyed that bit. But yeah, overall, Devil's Chord, much stronger episode. Really enjoyed it. Thought it was fantastic. I thought Maestro was a great villain. I actually wouldn't mind seeing Maestro again. I think they'd be great to see again. Same thing with the Toymaker. I'd love to see them again. Yeah, basically, overall thoughts on these two episodes. Devil's Chord was a really good episode. Space Babies, not so much. Had its moments, but wasn't a big fan of that one. As big a fan of that one, at least. The Doctor and Ruby are a great duo. I really like them. I'm really excited to see what they do in the coming series. Really excited to see and really interested to see where the story arc goes. And I'm really excited for next week, because next week we get the return of Stephen Moffat. And listen, Stephen Moffat's written some great episodes. He's written some terrible episodes. But the thing about Stephen Moffat is I don't think he's ever been boring. I've never watched anything written by Stephen Moffat and been bored. He's always interesting at the very least. So we'll see what happens next Saturday when he makes his return to Doctor Who with Boom. I'm so excited for that. Based on the little trailer that we saw, the little, few clips we saw at the end of Devil's Chord, super excited to see what he does. So yeah, let me know what you think of the first 2 episodes of Doctor Who Season 1/Series 14. Yeah, whatever your thoughts are, drop them down in the comments. Let's have a chat about it. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you when I see you. Bye.